GAOR Hit Parade, starring Frank Sinatra.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?
And now, Smile a While with Lorenzo Jones and his wife, Belle.
Here's the Manhattan merry-go-round that brings you the bright side of life, that whirls you in music to all the big night spots of New York town, to hear the top songs of the week sung so clearly you can understand every word and sing them yourself.
This is the golden age of radio. I'm Dick Bertel, and tonight we'll take you on another audio excursion back to radio's formative years. You'll hear the programs that made the era golden, and meet people who made those broadcasts a reality.
The Golden Age of Radio is brought to you by WTIC and the Cromwell Savings Division of Farmers and Mechanics Savings Bank. Hometown friends, serving your best banking interests in every way. Now, here is your host, Dick Bertel.
Good evening, and with me once again is radio historian collector Ed Corcoran. Ed, who's our guest tonight?
Well, tonight, let's do things a little bit different, Dick. Suppose we play an excerpt from our guest's career on television and listen to it and see if you can guess who it is.
Good evening. The time is spring, the year 1924, the place New York. And Frances Warfield is looking for a miracle to take her out of the desolate and lonely world in which she lives. Miss Warfield has told her story in a best-selling novel entitled There's No Need to Shout. Tonight, we present a television adaptation by Doria Folliot of that true story which begins in just a moment.
Well, Ed, there's not much question in my mind about the identity of tonight's guest, Robert Montgomery, and I might say that we are in Mr. Montgomery's office in Canaan, Connecticut, and it is a pleasure to have you on the golden age of radio, Mr. Montgomery, although your career spans 4 different phases of the entertainment media: theater, radio, television, motion pictures, and did I mention radio?
You did. You didn't.
Well, which one would you prefer to talk about? Do you have a favorite?
Well, I think that the most disciplined medium that I've ever been in has been the medium of television. At least it was when I was doing it, when I was producing it, because at that time there was no such thing as tape, and every show that we did for a period of 7 years on the networks was really an experiment and had to be done live. And live television was really the most disciplined and the most difficult type of producing and direction that I've ever been involved in, and in acting the same way.
Of course, there were so many innovations on that program, the Robert Montgomery Theater, the Robert Montgomery Presents series, and of course the one that I remember most vividly is the time you brought the carousel in for Ride the Pink Horse. Now, that was written about long before the show went on the air.
Oh, yes, long before. The original of Ride the Pink Horse was a novel, as you know, and then we made the film, and I went out to Tucson and Taos and found the little carousel up in Taos and brought it back to California. Then we brought it to also onto the television show. It was quite a job of production. The finding of that little carousel was very amusing. I went to Taos knowing that it was somewhere in Taos, and I went to the local librarian and asked her if she knew where it was, and she said, oh yes, she knew exactly where it was. It was in a chicken coop. And I said, good Lord, what's it doing there? And she said, well, that's where we store it every year. We store it out there in that chicken coop. And she said every year at carnival time it's brought out. The children are crazy about it. They have a wonderful time with it. But she said in the meantime that's where you were going to find it. So I went and found it. And then I made arrangements with the town to take it with me to California, where I said we would pay them rent for it and that we would promise to take very good care of it. We would also repaint it, which it needed badly. And in addition to that, they made us promise to take along a deputy sheriff to see that nothing happened to it. They didn't trust Hollywood, and I don't blame them.
I can understand.
Well, I'd like to maybe just talk a little bit about your motion picture career, since you're most famous for that. And could you just tell us about, your very first introduction to the films, how it came about and how you became a contract player with MGM?
Well, those were the days in the early days of sound, when sound first came in, and there was a great rush of talent scouts to New York City, to the theater, to find out about whether they couldn't pick up some young people in the theater and take them out there, people who knew something about the theater and knew something about the use of sound. They were, with some justification, I think, distrustful of a great many of the silent stars. Some of them did extremely well, those who had been theater trained. Some of them fell by the wayside because of the fact that their voices and their talents were not suited to the use of sound. And I was, at that time, in the theater in New York and had just opened in a play called Possession, which was written by Edgar Selwyn. And the talent scouts came around and began talking to me about wanting to know if they could take some tests. Well, I knew nothing about motion pictures. I had only seen 2 motion pictures in my life. One was The Patriot, and the other one was the Birth of a Nation, those 2 pictures. So and actually I have to admit that those of us who were the young people at that time who were in the theater really didn't have much use for motion pictures, silent pictures. So I made a test, but when I went to make the test, they didn't supply me with any material for the test. And the test was made at one morning at about 9 o'clock in the morning. So they said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I thought you would be going to give me something to do in the way of material." And they said, "Oh, no, that's up to you." And I said, "Well, get me something to eat, and I'll eat it, because I haven't had breakfast yet." So they sent out for my breakfast, and the result was that the test consisted of silent footage of me sitting there eating my breakfast. They took the test and developed, and I think were so bewildered and so mystified as to what I was doing that they had to come back and ask me about it. And then they submitted the test to a man who at that time was the head of Lowe's Incorporated, Nicholas Schenck. And his brother-in-law was Selwyn, who had produced the play that I was in. And he took a personal interest in it and very kindly asked them in California to look at it. And they looked at it, and much to my surprise, and I guess everybody else's, they asked me to sign a contract. I went to California for 6 months and stayed 25 years.
Did you regret it at any time?
A great many times I regretted it. On the whole, I think it was a beneficial experience. It was an educating process, I can tell you that. And it was at times sad. It was at times very exciting and very interesting. And as time went on and things got a little bit better in California from a point of view of the talent there, why, it became an interesting place to work. The original concept of the making of sound pictures was rather peculiar. They didn't have anybody who understood sound. They had a bunch of experts who came out and knocked on walls and did all kinds of ridiculous things. But they didn't understand sound. And the microphones at that time and in that day and age were hidden in bunches of flowers and in people's beards and all over the place. They simply destroyed any attempt at, or accidentally they destroyed any attempt at really getting any kind of sound dramatic value, because you couldn't speak and talk at the same time. You had to speak into one microphone, and if you had something to say to somebody across the room, you had to walk across the room and speak into another microphone. Later on, they developed a thing called a sound booth, which locked up the cameraman in a sound, and I'm unhappy to have to tell you also an airproof booth, which was probably the reason for the early demise of a large number of cameramen, because they couldn't breathe in these bloody things. And the result of that was that they began using booms to put the microphones on, and they followed you around instead of you following various microphones. It was all very difficult and very discouraging and very disheartening. There was also a method by which they recorded sound at that time, which had to do with a rather delicate thing called a light valve, which recorded the sound. And the light valve, if you spoke rather sharply, or if you clapped your hands, or if you happened to stamp your foot for any reason, it immediately broke the light valve. Mm-hmm. Then you'd have to go and get another light valve. Well, we discovered early in our young career, those of us who were out there at that time, that they were working us about 12, 14, 15, 16 hours a day, and they only had a limited number of light valves. So if we began to get tired after about 14 hours of work, we managed to bust the number of light valves that had been allocated to the company that particular day, and then we could go home.
That was a marvelous idea. You know, I'm curious to know much more about the motion picture career of Robert Montgomery, Ed, but I think it's time to listen to a radio excerpt.
Yeah, I guess we should, since it's what this is all about. Well, why don't we start off with a show that you actually produced when it was an hour long, The Suspense, and let's listen to the excerpt and then talk a little about the role Mr. Montgomery played in that show.
This is Robert Montgomery. I have a new assignment, and I'm very happy about it. During these 60 minutes each Saturday, I'm to be acting spokesman for one of radio's really great entertainments, a program which is a prime favorite with all of us. You have come to know its opening music as the curtain raiser for radio's outstanding theater of thrills. You know it as a show which each week, for 5 years, has brought you first-class story material and exciting performances. You have come to recognize throughout the unique touch of our unique producer, my friend, Bill Spear. All of which can be said in one word: suspense.
An hour of suspense now. A full 60 minutes on Saturday night. And with the distinguished actor-director Robert Montgomery as your host. Tonight, Mr. Montgomery also appears as star in The Black Curtain, a suspense play produced, edited, and directed by William Spear. Now, with The Black Curtain from the novel by Cornell Woolrich, and with the performance of Robert Montgomery, we hope once again to keep you in suspense.
A man is born, he lives out his little life, and he dies. That's the one real break, I guess, that every man can count on. The one thing nobody can take away from him. To be born just once, and to die just once. Every man, that is, except Frank Townsend. Born with no strikes on him, died with 2 strikes on him, and then was born again with 3 strikes on him. Pushed back into life that day on that street. My head was pounding like the percussion instruments beating out the anvil chorus. I could hear all the noise and the people milling around. At first, everything was a jumble, sight and sound. Tall buildings, high sky, low faces, spinning and weaving, and bells exploding.
All right, get moving now. Let the doc through.
Oh, I seen it, officer. I seen it. He was running fast. The whammo clump. He's growing like an onion with his head down and his feet up.
All right. Break it up now. Break it up.
Oh, my head.
Take it easy now, brother. Just lie still.
Who? What are he
now? I'm the doctor. Just lie still. I'll take it easy.
Copper! His wallet fell out of his pocket. A guy grabbed it and ran.
All right, come on, get back. I'll give him a little air. Get back.
I'm okay, Doc. I just feel a little...
Sure, here. Now, let me help you up. See if you can stand.
Thanks.
I guess I can talk to him now, eh, Doc?
Just a nasty bump on his head. He'll be okay. Here, let me brush your coat off, sir.
Thanks, Doc. My coat? Why am I wearing an
Just for my report, mister, what's your name and address, huh?
Townsend. Frank Townsend. 820 Rutherford Street.
Hey, a cigarette. You're still a little woozy, you know.
No, thanks. I don't smoke.
Well, look, take a couple of aspirin.
All right, come on, get started. Hey, here's your hat, mister.
Thanks, kid.
We'll see what we can do about the guy that snatched your wallet. Here's your cigar case.
Mike. Yes, but I haven't got a
Well, good luck, mister. I'm going to turn in my report.
cigar case. I don't smoke.
Oh, it just fell out of your pocket when we lifted you.
Yeah, but look at the initials on it. DN.
Yeah, same initials like in your hat, see? DN.
Yeah, but that isn't my hat.
Oh, you got a nasty crack on the noggin, mister, and, well...
Wait a minute. I'm trying to think. Where is this?
Where's what?
This street.
This? This is Tillery Street.
Tillery? What am I doing on Tillery Street?
Hey, look, buddy, you sure you're okay?
Well, what happened to me?
Well, you were running. Very dangerous running on this ice. Well, you slipped, hit your head, and was out for about 20 minutes.
Ice?
After that blizzard we had last night, did you expect mayflowers?
Blizzard? In July?
July? Oh, listen, buddy, I got a flash for you. This is December, 1 week before Christmas, 1944.
1940?
Oh, don't take it so hard. We all get older. You better get home and get a fast 40 winks. You'll need it.
1944. December 1944. But the last I could remember was July 1941. 3 years. Gone. Just gone. A black curtain. The black curtain of amnesia comes down over your mind out of nowhere. That black curtain had been dropped over my eyes for 3 years. Where had I been? Who had I been? Not Frank Townsend. Someone else. DN. Someone whose initials were DN. I walked along Tillery Street thinking about it. Those 3 years, I could have been married, had a family, or could have been a thief, or... No, it was insane. 20 minutes ago, I left the little office where Johnny and I have our advertising business. I was on my way to speak to a client. 20 minutes ago, I told Johnny that... But that was July 1941. There was no snow, no ice, no initials, DN. I must see Johnny. He'd know, he'd tell me.
Our guest tonight is Robert Montgomery, and we'll get back to his story right after this.
1975 has been a year of growth for two hometown banking friends and neighbors who have now joined together to better serve you. During this year, the Cromwell Savings Bank has joined with Farmers and Mechanics Savings Bank to offer even greater convenience to customers at any one of their 6 locations. An account at either bank is now an account at both. This means that these two hometown friends can now serve your best interest in every banking way. In addition to a number of savings plans designed to suit your individual needs, personal loans, home improvement loans, personal checking accounts will also be available starting January 1st. So stop in soon and apply for your personal checking account. The Cromwell Savings Bank division of Farmers and Mechanics Savings Bank has 2 convenient locations at the corner of Main and West Streets and the new Cromwell Plaza office near Kmart. Farmers and Mechanics has offices in Middletown at Main and College Streets and also on Washington Street. Other locations include Montville and Colchester, member FDIC and equal housing lenders. As 1976 approaches, they look forward to providing even better service to you and your family. Now, once again, back to Dick Bertel.
Robert Montgomery is our guest tonight here on the Golden Age of Radio. We just heard an excerpt from a suspense show of 1948 called The Black Curtain. And Ed, you indicated that was an hour-long program, so Mr. Montgomery, I've got to ask you, I know that Suspense was basically a half-hour show, and William Spear was the director. Whose idea was it to increase it to an hour's length?
Well, I think it was probably the probably Spears' idea, or possibly the advertising agency's idea of doing it. When you consider that they used to have to give X number of minutes for commercials, a 30-minute development of any kind of a dramatic thing was almost impossible, as it is today.
Well, let's get back to movies. As a member of Screen Actors Guild, I'm curious to know the origin of it.
The origin of the Screen Actors Guild was, of course, the pattern for it was the Actors Equity Association, which had been in existence in the theater for a great number of years. The origin of the Screen Actors Guild actually was a group of men who rather unselfishly risked their careers and their livelihoods by forming the Screen Actors Guild and setting it up. There were 8 of them, as I recall, and they set that guild up so that it could be at any time. They also, when they organized it, put their own resignations undated on the table. And what they were waiting for was a time when the conditions in the industry and the political conditions made it possible to organize the acting profession in California. Those of us who had been in the theater didn't look with too much terror on the question of organization because we were used to it. It had been handled very intelligently in the acting profession in the theater, and we were equally sure that it could be handled very intelligently in the motion picture industry. I like to believe that it was handled that way and that it's still being handled that way. When the time came, it came through the period just following the Depression, and it came through the government's enactment of the right of the legislation which gave people the right to organize, and the organization then was handed over by that group of 8 men to the people in the industry. I think that I really believe that it was probably one of the most unselfish acts that ever took place, not only the organization of it, but the implementation of the guild after it was taken over, because though there were those of us who, quite frankly, we had our bargaining power, there were those of us in the industry and in the business who had our individual bargaining power. Every one of those people who entered into the activities of the guild risked their contractual relationship with the studios for the benefit of a considerable number of extras and small part players who we did not believe were being properly compensated for their work.
What is your favorite motion picture over the years?
I think I have probably 3 that I like better than and it's difficult to know which one of the 3. One was Night Must Fall, of course, and one was Here Comes Mr. Jordan, and the other was The Earl of Chicago. Those 3 films. There were portions of each one of those films that I was quite satisfied with, which, if you analyze it, that's a small amount of satisfaction for 25 years of work.
Well, I suppose that's true for anyone who is in the creative arts. I'd like, speaking of creativity, I'd like to talk about your aspect as a director, and Lady in the Lake is the picture that comes to mind. This was, for that time, an entirely new concept, and one which I suppose was rather difficult to attain technically.
It was a completely new concept, and it came about, like most of these things, by accident. They wanted me to do Lady in the Lake, and they wanted it done in the classic manner of a whodunit, with Philip Marlowe as the central character, of course. And I was battling to do a picture based on Goldsworthy's Escape, which I felt would make, I think it was once made as a silent film, but I don't think it was ever made as a talking film. And I wanted to make it. Well, they wouldn't permit me to make it. They said that I had no right at that time to to say what I was going to do, and I said, well, I don't want to do I find no interest in The Lady in the Lake. And they said, well, why are you so interested in Escape, in the Goldsworthy piece? And I said, well, I have an idea of how to do it. And I outlined this idea, and they said, well, why don't you do Lady in the Lake that way? And I said, if you will permit me to do Lady in the Lake that way, I'll do it. Well, then, having gotten myself into that spot, I then had to develop the techniques which made it possible to do the film with the camera used as a first-person singular. In other words, with a subjective camera, not an objective camera. And that was very tricky. We had there were various techniques which we developed which have never been used since, because I don't think people know how to use them.
Well, you indicated that the film crew told you it couldn't be done.
Well, the camera department, which was a pretty efficient camera department at MGM, just threw up their hands in horror at the idea of what we were going to attempt to do. But I must say for the camera department that once we started to do, I worked for over 3 months beforehand with the men who were going to work with me as a camera crew. And little by little, we developed methods of doing certain types of shots. But every shot literally was an experiment. Every shot was a challenge, and this is what made it exciting for everybody connected with the picture.
Well, if you stop to think about it, a motion picture set has only 3 walls. The 4th wall is the camera. In this case, you had to have, if you were going to use the camera as Philip Marlowe from the subjective viewpoint, you had to have 4 walls, really.
We had to have 4 walls, and we had to get rid of at least one of them during the course of a shot, which was a pretty tricky piece of technique. In those days, the booms that they had were so heavy that when we had to remove one of those walls, we actually had to remove about 3.5 tons of equipment. And we had to do that silently. We had to do that during the course of the shot.
You said the most interesting shot in the picture. The one I remember, of course, is the staircase where you appear briefly in the mirror. But you said the most difficult shot, or the one most memorable for you, was the one in the phone booth. Tell me about that.
Well, that was a shot where I had to, I as the character of Marlowe, in other words, the camera, had to go and pick up a telephone and call a number. And he'd been hurt. And he went to a phone booth after an automobile accident in which they had poured whiskey over him to try and prove that he was drunk during the accident. And he crawled away from the wreck and crawled over to the telephone booth. And by sheer strength, he pulled himself up in the phone booth. Well, now, we had to have one man who had to play his hands, another man who had to play a reflection in a piece of glass alongside of him without showing his face. Then at the same time, we had to remove 3 sides of the telephone booth during the course of the shot itself. Well, if you know, it took us a whole night to get the shot and get it properly.
Well, if you think about that film and think about film techniques, a shot usually runs 10 or 15 seconds at the most, and then you stop and you move the camera for a close-up or whatever. Now, you couldn't do that with Lady in the Lake.
No, we could not. Actually, what you're talking about is the difference between net and gross footage. The standard film made at that time in California used to average about 2.5 to 3 minutes of what we called net footage. In other words, the footage that actually would appear on the screen. Net, about 2.5 to 3 minutes of net footage a day. When we started a shot, we had to shoot 10 minutes of film. So we had 10 minutes of net footage, and we substituted the movement of the camera for cutting. That's a little technical, but I think it's difficult to understand without a drawing, but there it is.
Well, you know, Ed, we can't provide the film, but we can provide a recorded version of it.
Yes, very fortunate we have a recording of Mr. Montgomery doing this very film on the air, of course, in the Lux Radio Theater. And you won't be able to see the camera or know it, but you can at least follow the action, and it was a very exciting broadcast as well as an exciting film, Dick.
Lux presents Hollywood. Lever Brothers Company, the makers of Lux Flakes, bring you the Lux Radio Theater.
starring Robert Montgomery and Audrey Totter in Lady in the Lake. Ladies and gentlemen, your producer, Mr. William Keeley.
Greetings from Hollywood, ladies and gentlemen. Almost all of us, at one time or another, have a secret hankering to play detective. Tonight we give you that opportunity to join in solving one of the screen's most baffling murder mysteries. You'll meet the possible suspects, and you'll find the clues in Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer's thrilling screen hit, Lady in the Lake, based on Raymond Chandler's novel and currently playing in theaters throughout America. And you'll have the help of Robert Montgomery in the starring role of ace detective Philip Marlowe. Co-starred with Bob is that exciting new performer, Audrey Totter.
My name is Marlowe, Philip Marlowe. Occupation, private detective. You know, somebody says, follow that guy, so I follow him. Or find that female, so I find her. And what do I get out of it? $10 a day in expenses. Right now, you're hearing a lot about a murder. They call it the case of the Lady in the Lake. That's a good title. It fits. But what you've heard about is one thing, and the real thing is something else again. There's only one guy who knows that. I know it. I started finding out about it a few days before Christmas. I was tired of being pushed around for nickels and dimes, so I decided I'd write about murder. I pounded out a story and sent it to the Kingsby Publications Incorporated, specialists in literary gore.
Oh, come in, Mr. Marlowe, to hear about the story you wrote.
Yeah, I got a letter from a guy named A. Fromsett.
I'm Fromsett. Adrian Fromsett, to be precise. Tell me something, Mr. Marlowe. Have you done much writing?
No.
You do very well for a beginner.
Well, it's based on an authentic case. You run this publishing business all by yourself, Miss Fromsett?
No, Mr. Kingsby runs it. Tell me, are there really detectives like the one in your story who never lie, cheat, or double-cross a client?
Yeah, there are a couple of dopes like that.
Good. Then you were writing about yourself.
Look, you don't really want to buy my story, do you?
I was about to offer you $200.
Oh, no, you weren't. Why don't you quit being cute? The real reason I'm here is because you want a smooth operator who keeps his mouth shut. When you read my story, you said, that's my boy. He's dumb, he's brave, and he's cheap. Am I right?
Partly.
Then why all this Mickey Mouse about my story?
I want you to find Mr. Kingsby's wife without his knowing you're looking for her. She's a vicious woman, a liar.
I don't want to be nosy, Miss Fromsett, but what makes that any of your business?
I handle all of Mr. Kingsby's affairs. He wants to divorce her. And I don't like your manners.
I'm not selling my manners. I'm not selling my story either. I don't like getting mixed up with a tricky female, even one as good-looking as you, who wants to dispose of the boss's wife just so she can marry him herself.
People don't talk to me like that, Mr. Marlowe.
Maybe somebody should talk to you like that more often.
I beg your pardon?
Hogaminderi. This is Philip Marlowe. He submitted a story. Mr. Marlowe, Mr. Kingsby.
Hi.
Always nice to see one of our writers, Mr. Marlowe.
But he isn't one of our writers. He just turned down an offer of $200. Rather indignantly, too. But maybe he's right, Derry. This story has part of Mr. Marlowe's soul in it. I would say it's worth $500 as souls go these days.
Congratulations, Mr. Marlowe. A businessman as well as a writer, eh?
And a private detective.
Detective?
And that's what makes the story so authentic. It's so full of, what would you say it's full of, Mr. Marlowe?
Short sentences.
The Lady in the Lake, with our guest, Robert Montgomery. We'll get back to our story right after this.
1 and 1 usually makes 2, but sometimes 2 things join together and become 1. This isn't new math. It's the all-new combination of Cromwell Savings and Farmers and Mechanics Savings Banks. In an age of expanding and changing bank service, these 2 old friends and neighbors have joined to maintain the greatest customer convenience for thousands of lucky customers. An account at either bank is an account at both, which means these hometown friends can now serve your best interest in every banking way. Full personal banking service, including checking accounts, available January 1st. But you can begin right now with savings and loans at both, because an account at one means an account at both. So 1 plus 1 equals a bigger 1. The Cromwell Savings Bank division of Farmers and Mechanics Savings Bank has 2 convenient locations, at the corner of Main and West Streets and the new Cromwell Plaza office near Kmart. Farmers and Mechanics Savings Bank have offices in Middletown at Main and College and also on Washington Street. Other locations include Montville and Colchester. Member FDIC.
Now back to Dick Bertel.
Our guest tonight here on the Golden Age of Radio is Robert Montgomery.
Well, Mr. Montgomery, I'd like to pursue with you an area we haven't discussed with any of our guests before, and that is the selection of roles. It seems if you study films, you find out that the people who play the roles never were the people that they wanted in the first place. Sometimes the third or fourth choice. And I understand in your career that you were offered the leading role in It Happened One Night before it was offered to Clark Gable, and for some reason or other you didn't want to do the part. Do you recall, your thinking at the time?
Well, this was at the time that Clark had just started, and he had played 1 or 2 minor roles at MGM, but nothing particularly spectacular. And the studio was angry with him for some strange reason. I don't know, probably he'd said he didn't want to do something. And they were angry with him, so that they, when they got a call from Columbia, said they wanted to borrow me for this picture that was to be directed by Frank Capra called It Happened One Night. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know that this was taking place. This was in too high a managerial echelon for me to bother with at that time. And so I knew that there was a rumor that I was to go over to. I had never been loaned by MGM before, but there was a rumor that I was going to go over to Columbia for some picture. I didn't know what it was, but I hadn't heard anything of it directly. And then I heard that they had this row with Clark, and that Clark was being punished by being sent over there. So they sent Clark over to punish him. And they punished him, of course, by making his career. And they kept me at MGM thinking that they were giving me some form of compliment by not loaning me to Columbia, but by putting me in a picture which was a complete and abysmal flop. So their calculations, which were sort of pseudo-Machiavellian, went wrong.
Television, of course, comes to mind now, and you moved into a brand new field at a time when you were a major motion picture actor. What made you make that decision when other members of the motion picture field were turning their backs on television?
I think the thing that influenced me more than anything else was something called the line of least resistance, which is the thing that has, of course, made television. It's a darn sight easier to sit in your home and push a button and see something on a tube than it is to, which you are told you're getting free, but you're not, of course. It's a darn sight easier to do that than it is to get a babysitter and, if you're a young husband or a young wife, and go out to a movie, and it's an effort these days to go to a movie, and it's pretty much of an effort, as far as I'm concerned, to see most of the movies that you see today. But I was convinced that television would be a medium which it would be fascinating to work with. Though, as you said before, I'd worked in the theater, and I'd worked in motion pictures, I'd worked on TV or on radio. And TV offered a new challenge, and I felt it would be kind of silly to pass it up. I wanted very much to produce on TV. I wanted to prove something to myself, which I think we succeeded in proving, which was that this nonsense that they say about TV audiences is nonsense. They are bright people. They are people who like quality better than they like the nonsense that is really going on the air today, because today they have no choice. They take nonsense or nothing. And the result is that we left the air with, I think, rather we were told that we were not going to have our show any longer, not by the sponsors, but by the network, who wanted to produce in that time themselves. So they simply took us off the air and put their own programs in. 3 years after the program went off the air, I was very much pleased and very, very flattered to find that someone had taken a very comprehensive poll about asking the question of what show that you can remember on television would you like to see come back again. And Robert Montgomery Presents won it hands down. So we produced such things as Victoria Regina, Our Town, Appointment in Samara. We produced things that had a quality to it. We produced, and we never produced without a purpose. We were very careful in the selection of our material. We had an objective in mind when we went on the air, not a political objective, not a social objective, but we did have a dramatic or comedic objective. We produced one story which appeared in Time magazine and Life magazine, which was the story of a man who had a heart attack. I produced a mystery story in which the man who was the central character in it never spoke. And we managed to do things which we thought were interesting, and the public certainly responded.
Well, if your theory is right, why didn't the public respond by insisting that programs like this continue if they really do want quality?
I would suggest that anybody who tries to insist that you change the curiously moronic form of television today would find themselves up against a completely solid wall of resistance from the networks themselves, the networks, of course, are run on the assumption that they appeal to the lowest common denominator, and this is of course ridiculous, and in the end will slowly but surely defeat them. They will not be able to continue dramatic programs, or not dramatic programs, but programs of drama and comedy, and do it that way. The nonsense that they put on in the air today is, you can go to any community in this country and talk about programming on television and find yourself leading a lynching party.
Well, it was another very, very important milestone following this, and that is when Mr. Eisenhower was elected president. You became a one-of-a-kind, the first of an advisor as far as his TV appearances, and I wonder whether you could just give us a little insight as to what you did in that capacity with Mr. Eisenhower.
It was probably the most interesting 8 years I ever spent anywhere. It was the White House duties under President Eisenhower as a member of his staff, but the misinterpretation of it by almost everybody,
including me, probably,
was that I was in some way coaching President Eisenhower in how to speak or how to talk or some such thing, or putting on his makeup or taking off his glasses or something. And of course that was far from the truth. There was no such performance ever took place. What I was doing was to try and make him as comfortable as I possibly could, in front of a television camera. He had been getting some non-professional and sort of curious advice from everybody, including Winston Churchill, about how he should behave on television. And none of it was valid. All of it was ridiculous. And they were telling him what he could do and what he couldn't do and what he should do and what he shouldn't do. And I think that he kind of gave up in despair listening to all these voices, and he wanted someone who at least had appeared on television and knew a little bit about television to talk to him about it. That and the penetration of language and the speeches, the use of television for certain events, whether we wanted to use it for certain public events, public appearances, or whether it was advisable not to. those were the things that was the policy, more or less, involved in the televising. He goes down in my book, and I think eventually will go down in history as probably one of the greatest men we ever had, either serving our country in any capacity.
William Manchester's book, The Glory and the Dream, seems to be indicating that already, that the so-called Eisenhower years were actually very, very great years. Yeah.
Well, he was a great man, and there was no one that I know of who was more dedicated and had been more dedicated in his entire life than Dwight David Eisenhower. He was. I was devoted to him. I consider it a great privilege to having worked with him, and I'm quite sure that nothing will ever be quite as exciting again.
Well, of course, we remember Dwight David Eisenhower as President of the United States. We also remember him as a five-star general during World War II, and we happen to have an excerpt from a World War II type drama.
Yes, this is a chance to play a role you didn't do on the screen. This is in radio. You did the James Cagney role in 13 Rue Madeleine, one of the early Cloak and Dagger films.
Oh, yeah.
So this is what I was leading up to when I was asking you that question before, because radio did give an accurate chance to play a role you couldn't play in the movies. You could play it on radio anyway, and this is how you did it on 13 Rue Madeleine on Lux Video Theater.
Well, for heaven's sake, don't tell Jim Cagney about it, because he'd probably shoot me.
Not until Pearl Harbor did the United States fully realize how frighteningly effective had been the espionage machines of Japan and Germany. Shortly after this disaster, we established a secret espionage service, the first in our history. As the man most capable of organizing the United States Intelligence Corps, an attorney from St. Louis was selected, Charles S. Gibson.
I accepted the appointment largely because of the men who would be working with me. Men like Robert Emmett Sharkey of St. Paul, Minnesota. Master of 5 languages, Robert Sharkey was twice captured by the Germans in World War I, escaping each time with a brilliant record of achievement behind enemy lines. Starting in 1942, with Sharkey's help, we trained and sent overseas 76 groups of agents. Then came Group 77, each a member, a volunteer for hazardous duties behind enemy lines. In the group were men like Pappy Simpson.
George T. Simpson, age 47, British Intelligence Office, World War I. 12 years, professor of English literature at Dartford College.
The majority were much younger. Take Jeff Lassiter, for instance.
Born in Bern, Switzerland, 1920, son of United States Consul. Educated at Geneva and Oxford. Recruited from Officers Training School, can speak French fluently.
There were 3 women in Group 77. One was Suzanne de Beaumont.
I am a citizen of France. I found myself stranded in the United States when my country came under the Nazi domination in 1940. My husband is a captain of the artillery in the French army. I have had no word of him in over 4 years.
There was Bill O'Connell.
Graduate, Rutgers University. 8 years in the Foreign Department in Washington, National Bank. Was in Europe 2 years prior to Hitler's march into Poland. Returned to New York in 1939.
22 of them all told, and their training commenced in one of those secluded country estates not far from Washington. The day they arrived, I got together with Robert Sharkey.
Well, they look all right to me, Gib. How much time will I have with them?
3 months indoctrination, 2 weeks practical exercises. I wish I could make it longer, but I can't.
They'll be ready.
Oh, one of your pupils speaks German.
Good.
He can speak German because he's a German agent.
A German agent? Here? You're sure?
Yes.
Man or woman?
Well, I want you to find that out for yourself. Let me know when you think you've spotted him.
Is that all?
That's all. For now.
Thanks. Well, I'll get to work. May I have your attention, ladies and gentlemen? You all know why you're here. First, I must remind you that everything you learn, everything you do, is secret. Not even your closest relative can know you're an agent of Group 77. Maybe no one will ever know. That's not important. But keeping your mouth shut is important. You'll have a lot to remember and a couple of things to forget. Forget the rules. Forget sportsmanship. No secret agent is a hero or a good sport. That is, no living agent. You're going to be taught to kill, to cheat, to lie, and everything you learn is directed toward one objective, just one: the success of your mission. Fair play is out. Years of decency and honest living, forget all that, or get out now, because the enemy can forget and has forgotten. I'll be with you every inch of the way. All the way. Good luck to you. All right, Sergeant, show them to their quarters.
13 Rue Madeleine is played on radio on the Lux Radio Theater by our guest, Robert Montgomery. We'll get back to our guest in just a moment.
Old friends, hometown neighbors. Cromwell Savings Bank is now a division of Farmers and Mechanics Savings Bank. And together, they serve your best interest in every banking way. Open an account in either bank, and you have an account at both. And beginning January 1st, 1976, you'll get full personal banking service, including checking accounts. Join the family in the main office in Middletown at the corner of Main and College Street, at 846 Washington Street in Middletown, the Midway Shopping Center in Montville, Colchester Shopping Center, Colchester, 327 Main Street, Cromwell, or at the Cromwell Plaza near Kmart. In an age of expanding and changing bank services, Cromwell Savings Bank and Farmers and Mechanics Savings Bank have joined together to serve your best banking interests in every way. Member FDIC.
Our guest, Robert Montgomery. We're visiting with Mr. Montgomery in his Canaan, Connecticut office. How do you feel about the rating system today, Mr. Montgomery?
You can get any rating you want, of course. They'll give you a rating saying that all the left-handed men in the four most western states loved your program. You know, they can give you a very high rating. They say your rating is, you had 67% of the audience. The rating, this rating business is, nobody has bothered to tell us so far with any degree of truth that 1.5 million people looked at a program and 1 million of them disliked it.
I suppose you're right.
So this sums up the rating program. You know, I mean, I can see some poor benighted devil who has to sit at a telephone and call up people and ask them if they've seen a program or if they're looking at a program. And I'm sure that they get conditioned to hearing a yes or no, and then they hang up rather quickly for fear of getting a criticism.
Well, that probably answers my question. Robert Montgomery, thank you so much for being our guest on the Golden Age of Radio tonight. And until next time, this is Dick Bertel.
Ed Corcoran.
Good night.
Hal Kemp on the air for Griffin.
The Golden Age of Radio has been brought to you by WTIC and Cromwell Savings Division of Farmers and Mechanics Savings Bank. Hometown friends, serving your best banking interests in every way. The Golden Age of Radio was produced by Bob Shirago and Dick Bertel.
Benny Goodman Swing School, the Tuesday evening rally of everybody everywhere who gets a lift from the new pulsating music of youth, swing.
The Lux Radio Theater brings you Rita Hayworth and Charles Corbin in